Welcome to the Mindful Place Summit. Today we have Dianne Kraft, President of Child Diagnostics Inc. and considered the leader in alternate teaching strategies by several teaching universities. She has a master's degree in special education and has over 25 years of experience teaching bright children who have to work too hard to learn. In her quest to learn more about learning disabilities and their causes, Dianne became a certified natural health professional to provide better understanding how an upset biochemistry can impact students' learning. As a nutritionalist, Dianne also specializes in natural treatments for kids with sensory processing dysfunction and focus attention issues. She has developed the successful three-pronged approach to reducing and eliminating learning disabilities: brain integration therapy, right brain healing teaching strategies, and targeted nutritional interventions. Parents across the country have seen their children overcome learning struggles using these tools. Dianne has since creating remedial program Reading, Writing, Spelling, and Math, which incorporates her powerful middle line therapy. Hundreds of teachers and homeschool families are using the alternate teaching strategies to successfully remediate their students. Dianne teaches educators, psychologists, speech therapists, occupational therapists, and parents these life-changing concepts directly so that they can work with their students and children. My goodness, Dianne, thank you so much for taking the time to connect. Just reading your bio is just incredible, the work that you have been putting together for the last 25 years, and I'm really excited to talk.
I was surprised to hear that myself.
Oh, goodness.
Are you sure that was all me?
Right? So thank you so much for taking the time today. And if you could share with our listeners that are watching, what is brain integration therapy?
Well, I'm just so glad for this opportunity to talk with you, such a soul sister, as we would say. We think alike and we have the same passion, which just is to recognize that the body and the brain are actually connected, not just accidentally, but they play a role together, and they play a role in learning, and that when we get into playfulness, that we can all learn better. And those are all the things we're going to get to explore this morning. As a special education teacher, this was not automatic for me, because we get bachelor's and then master's, and it's all in stats, testing them, see how many points between their IQ and the Woodcock-Johnson, do they qualify for special education? If they're behind, then do they get so many minutes of pull out? And all of that is very calibrated. And in school in general, even though it's a wonderful institution, we're all learning fine, but in general, it's more data and curriculum oriented. And if we fit into that piece, I tell you what, it's just a really nice, comfortable place. Some of us would love to have a little more body involvement. And all of our preschoolers, we start out, everything is what? Motor movement, mouth movement, everything is that. And when we get our kindergartners in, somebody said, well, why, when they were introducing putting some color and picture into some algebra memory things, and they said, well, why don't we use more of that in the high school? I said, those are wonderful memory hooks that we stopped using after kindergarten. Don't we use kinesthetic? We call kinesthetic, which later on becomes more visual, but kinesthetic is a big part of it. So how did I learn about brain integration therapy? I was desperate for answers for my 6th, 7th, 8th graders that I was teaching in my resource room. I also taught 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and some kindergartners in other years in different schools. But by some of the things I learned the most, the little ones were so easy that I learned those lessons from them so fast. I would just add some body movement and found out their vestibular system, their nervous system settled down. But my older students, by the time I would get them, they had many, many years of basically hitting the wall. So I prayed. I went to the one who knows it all. And I said, okay, I have a lot of books here and they're very good, but they say go to the source. So I said, so God, show me the answers that you already have. It's nothing new. I don't have to learn it. If I did, we'd be in trouble. So I started traveling around the state and the country and just going to people who knew more about the brain and learning and were more on the cutting edge and more interested in teaching students to use their brain and strategies than necessarily getting all the pages done in the workbook. So again, I don't mean to say that one is bad and one is good. Incorporating, like you said, you talked earlier about all the differences in kids, incorporating whatever you can. But probably the most remarkable story that I can tell you that will get everybody curious because it's true and it's just amazing to me. There was a young man named Josh Decker, and I can use his full name because they wrote a newspaper article about him. And I was teaching 6th, 7th, 8th graders in a resource room, and I had a gal across the hall, Anna Alvarado, who also taught 6th, 7th, 8th graders. Pull out. A resource room means we pulled them out for reading, pulled them out for writing if they needed it, or pulled them out for math class, whatever they needed, where they were more than 2 years behind. If they were just a little bit behind, then we had a consultant that worked in the classroom. And this is how it worked with special education. I think it does to a large degree now, except we have interventionists where we can do interventions before special ed. And that's, of course, just a wonderful way to go. Sometimes it's just a glitch. They have to work harder and they're not behind. Or it's a dysfunction where they have to work harder, they're about a year behind. Or a true dyslexia or dysgraphia where they have to work a lot harder and they're about 2 or 4 years behind. So then we just determine how we can help them. Well, Josh came to my classroom from being in other schools where he had been put in an MR class. He was autistic, on the autistic spectrum, but that's a wide spectrum. So wide that it's almost unusable in terms of its definition. But he was not nonverbal, but he couldn't engage. So probably more like Asperger's, but he wasn't even writing his name right. They decided he was MR because he wasn't responding. That's mentally retarded. Then earlier he had been in behavior classes. So the family moved to this area and they wanted to be in special ed. And we didn't have what we might have had a profound needs group. It was just moderate needs, kids who had average or above average IQ. Many of them were gifted, but they were, like we say, spelling was WZ. So they needed me for a while. So anyway, so they had a meeting and they said, well, would you take him in your classroom, Mrs. Kraft? And I said, oh, I'd love to, because I had just been learning about this midline therapy. And I said, I don't know if I can change anything about Josh, but I can get him to read. Dyslexia is not permanent. That's just a misconnection where they're reversing. And that's a midline therapy issue. I found it all the time. And so I thought, okay, I can give him that part. Well, I was just first learning. This is, if you can believe, like 20 years ago. So that's how long this has been out. It just isn't well known. And I don't know the answer to that. And you don't either. So we're just here doing our little part, just to tell people there are so many more answers. So anyway, I began doing the midline therapy that I had learned from Dr. Dennison and lots of other Dr. Wright, people that I went to and learned from them in classes where everybody was from Canada or from Europe. It was just odd classes. But I learned about the association between the body and the brain, that when we learn something new, it goes in our concentrating brain. Then in a little while, after about 6 months, it crosses over the corpus callosum, like for writing, goes into the right brain. So now they can think and write at the same time. They can't think and write at the same time. It's because they're thinking about their writing, which way the BD goes, that type of thing. So we found that by making motor movements that cross the midline, physical movements, that it actually made connections. Doman and Delicato came up with this, as you know, in the 60s. It's still true today. They developed this for babies who had in utero brain bleeds, and thus their speech was impacted, and they had them crawl. And when they crawled, they found they reconnected the parts of the speech, and they connected that back to front, the receptive to expressive brain. So it's just fascinating. And I remember reading about that. And then it was it was put in disrepute. And I just believe it's because it just plain was a lot more work in the classroom. And it was. But we didn't get on the floor and cross crawl. We learned from Dr. Dennison and others that we could stand up and do the cross crawl. And as far now that we had MRIs and brain scans, we could see the brain activity. So when I saw Josh, we always did the brain integration exercises, crossing the midline for the body and for the eyes, for the ears, and for the writing. And then once a week, we had them look upper left, because remember, that lights up the right long-term memory, whole picture awareness brain. Left brain's data, data, data. Left brain loves lists of words, list of numbers, steps, order, schedule. This was, what are we doing today? So we need to get, as that for autism, he needed to get into his right automatic brain, but more than automatic for learning, he needed to get into his right awareness brain, because that's why they don't get the social cues. And sometimes they even call it a nonverbal learning disability, which means this half of the brain, like we said, when people think we don't need to use our imaginative side or our nonverbal side, well, then it's like we had a hemispherectomy. Our right brain is our visual and imaginative side. So anyway, they need to be used together, not to exalt one over the other. They need to be used together. So once a week, this is what we learned. We had him look upper left, and we put on music, because music stimulates the brain. And I stood in front of him, and each child, one by one, I worked on Fridays, one-on-one with them. And we did the cross crawl. And I remember for him, he couldn't keep his eyes, because he had gaze aversion, as you can imagine. I couldn't keep his eyes up on, I thought I had the most interesting sports poster known to mankind up there. And the other kids could keep their eyes up there, but he couldn't, because of course he was not used to that. So as he was doing this, I thought to myself, oh, I'm so sorry that this isn't going to work for Josh, because I don't have lots of tools in my bag. And this is my big tool. So, but I thought, well, you know what I can do? I can make him feel accepted. So every Friday, he got his turn to do the patterning, as we call it, brain patterning, our brain training. And of all things, each time I saw his eyes staying up there longer, and then he'd look away. I mean, I always would direct his eyes and, etc., but sustained time until it probably was 6 weeks later, and he was doing that with his eyes up the whole time. And I noticed I was getting conversation out of him. Instead of Elvis died today, I died today. I mean, it was such a conversation to make any sense. And so we had an early IEP meeting with him, and it was in October. We often don't like the early ones because we haven't had a chance to work with them very much. But we went to the IEP meeting, and the neighbors came with the parents. And they said, what have you been doing with Josh? It's like he woke up. He now comes over, at our table, looks at us, and has conversations. And I just was blown away. I still get chills when I think about that, because now I've seen that many times, but I didn't know. I knew that brain integration therapy, making the connections, helped with academics. I did not know that it got them into this whole wonderful world of interactions. And they said he can read faces. Well, as it turned out, the school he had come to before this, as a 7th grader, they had him in that self-contained classroom, and he needed a parapro to get around the school because he got lost all the time. Well, after Christmas of this year in his new school, in our school, he became a runner for the counselors. It was a 2-story school. He started taking the bus to school, the bus to go downtown. So then anyway, somehow the newspaper got a hold of it, the education of Joshua. And he talks about, he's now reading Star Wars books. And in fact, I think he went up to Denver, to the Capitol, and spoke for the idea for the Disabilities Act. And so, I mean, it made such a huge difference. Now, the other kids, they were learning to read. All the reversals were going away. I was so grateful that it turned out to be exactly what I hoped it would be, that we don't want to deal with reversals. We consider anytime a child makes a reversal, they say, oh, they only reverse once in a while. But if they reverse one time, there are 5 other times they had to think about it. that showed me it wasn't in the automatic hemisphere. So we take reversals very seriously after age 7. So I was getting rid of those right and left, and I was so glad to be able to do that. But Joshua is the fellow who actually just blew me away and still does, just because of the fact that for when we talk about our wonderful kids, and that is growing a lot, who are on the autism spectrum, whether they are nonverbal, oftentimes they can get to be verbal. In fact, people really get that on a regular basis. And then it's the most important things for our wonderful Asperger's kids, the kids who they are so bright. They love data. The one young man, his favorite part of the movies was watching the credits at the end of the movie because they were so orderly in there. He said, "Oh yes, but getting, street smarts. This is street smarts, the right side of our brain. The left is book smarts. We want both of them." So that was the whole story. In fact, we found later on that really the hand heals the brain, and I'm going to talk about after a while how do we get rid of those writing reversals that actually then help them so spatially that drivers, like we had Master Drive in Denver, they send their teenagers to us to learn this writing aid exercise that's done on midline, because they said no one will drive with them. None of the inspectors will go with those kids because they aren't in command of left and right, and they don't really stay in that lane all that well. So we do show them that exercise that we learned that's been around. Dr. Getman came up with that 40 years ago. We incorporated that into our language arts class. And so not only did it help with the driving, the kids now use it for basketball. If a child isn't riding a bike, 3 weeks after riding a bike, by doing that writing aid exercise created by Dr. Getman, as I say, we do it with a crayon and a piece of paper. So it's really low key. There's no money to be made in this because the curriculum is just, it's your imagination, color. We have some things on our website if people don't want to make everything, but it really, it's just color and your imagination and the midline. So anyway, he was making so much progress with that, and we found that. So I just want to, I have a note here to remind myself, because we have been exploring how the body and the brain and the hand can heal trauma. So I have I teach these for graduate level classes for teachers and have for years, and then they work it with their classroom, and then they send me case histories. Well, there's one gal sent me, she's from Florida, not only the case histories of the students, which I learned so much from, and I realized how much I missed the classroom, but she said for herself, she had been taking a lot of medicine for PTSD. And she did that writing aid exercise, which it's like the infinity symbol, but you put your left hand, your non-writing hand, right in the middle, and you do 3 times around, which lights up the right brain. Any random don't think about it activity is a right brain activity. That's why we like to chew gum. It's a right brain activity. It helps us use our concentrating brain. And then we put the letters of the alphabet on there. And of course, as a teacher, she knew her letters. It isn't about the letters. The letters are what gives the directionality. It internalizes directionality. And they have an internalized gyroscope. What I'm realizing now, not only, of course, did that get rid of written reversals or visual reversals, when we don't have that strong plumb line, when that got disconnected, Brain Balance calls it disconnected kids. I like that term. It is, because a disconnection can be connected. So when they get disconnected, it doesn't just affect the writing. That's what we see. It affects their thoughts. They're scattered. They say they can't tell me a story from beginning to end. And sometimes he said they can't think their story and write it at the same time. That's a disconnect that can be connected. And so I thought, so it all the way down to the emotional, because she said she started doing that writing aid with her students. We recommend they sit there and do it with them. Then there's no groaning. We just all do this. One time my 8th graders would groan, "Oh, we don't like this. We're tired of this. Maybe it hurts my hand." I said, "Oh, you know what? We don't have to do that. The language arts teacher gets to choose what they do during that hour. Let's put those away." I have some worksheets here on gerunds and participles and diagramming. that I haven't used all year. So we need to do those. So of course, by Wednesday, they were begging to do the writing aid. They said, oh, no, we really need to do all the way to Friday because, you just can't leave the gerund in the middle of the week. So, so we got a long time of less complaining about it. But otherwise, we found when they do it with them. So she was doing it with them, and she said, and in fact, I have her whole story here, but the story is the bottom line. She said she noticed that her thoughts weren't getting so wild. Then they weren't so dark anymore. Then she could sleep better. And by the end of this 6 months' time, she didn't need her medicine anymore. So it is an emotional release. One of my psychologists said, oftentimes psychologists, particularly in this one middle school I was teaching that had 1,000 kids in it, so it was big. So she had many kids on her caseload, one of whom was Ryan. He was a 6th grader, and Ryan had a lot of Tourette's. So he was ticking a lot, and it was very uncomfortable for him. And you can imagine in middle school how that was accepted. So she just stood and watched in my class because that she could record that she had contact with them. And that's really probably all he needed. But we'd always watch that writing aid. We would do it together as 8th graders because then they said, even the basketball students, they used to, they all complained. And at first they got to buy a complaint. I would give them 2 complaints because God has grace. 2 complaints, I could roll off my back, but they would kind of wear me down with a lot of complaints, so they'd have to buy them. And so, but I would give them some quarters ahead of time. And so they could either buy a complaint or keep the quarter. So we've got some different ways to make that work. But at any rate, as she watched him do it, she said, I've seen when Ryan does that writing aid, he has no tics the rest of the day as I see him in his classes. And now we've seen that otherwise. Again, that was my first introduction to that. And we have had parents, teachers used to say in these classes, my parent had a stroke. Do you think any of these exercises would help? I said, all I know is it won't hurt. And so what they do is sometimes you just, like they can't swallow. And they say, well, just do the activity of swallowing so the body knows what you're focusing on. And then have them look up or left. And if they're sitting in a wheelchair, you do their arms and legs because it's the movement. The proprioceptor muscles will speak to the brain and nervous system. And so again, we started getting reports that was helpful. Not my area at all, but obviously it's God's area of the brain and body. And then the last one that is so wonderful is a 24-year-old named Britton, and he actually is translating our manual into Spanish now. But when he was 15, he had a tumor on his pituitary gland and had to have that removed. And he said prior to that, he could read and do everything so early. He lost all those skills. His dad was a neurological OT, or PT probably. And anyway, so he worked a lot with him and he got a lot of skills back, but some things just never did. So his mother called and said, would we consult and work with him? And I said, this just isn't my area. I wouldn't want you to think that we have any control over that. Well, she said, well, would you just help me think it through? And so I said, oh, well, yeah, we can do that. Well, she's now, of course, one of our certified learning specialists in doing it because of all things, again, the writing aid, the eye aid, all of the things that he found. He didn't have so many saccadic eye movements. His eyes settled down. And he said in church, he could remember the words when he was speaking, when he was in worship. He had, it was now going to school, community college, and working at Walmart. And the Walmart boss said, Britton, what are you doing? Everything's coming so easy for you. And he said, I know, it's ever since I've done this midlife. So it's another piece. Nothing's a whole answer, but it's another piece of the puzzle. So I'm going to breathe and let you talk.
Yeah, no, I'm just inspired by your stories. And what's coming up for me right now is, you talk about putting away the medicine. And of course, every doctor, practitioner, and so forth, I feel that, obviously a parent choice, but for parents to know that there's options out there. I have a very close friend of mine, and what has happened was the school said, Kate, here's some of the learning challenges that she's faced with. This is what we're suggesting, and make a doctor's appointment, and right away it's a label. And, the piece that I'm taking away is, don't just always settle for that label. Yes, I understand that, you know, we have these diagnostics and that can support us, but knowing that there's much more behind that, to understand the brain, the body, and just hearing you speak, I just want to just keep you close by because the knowledge that you have is so inspiring.
Just move in over there. Do you have a nice room?
Yeah, I definitely do. But it's, you know, sharing that, you know, for our listeners to understand that there are alternative ways to
There
think.
are alternative ways, yes. And give them a try. Take the medicine with it. It doesn't hurt. You can do your body movements with the medicine. And she just knew. She said she just, you know, one day forgot it and realized she was doing well. But you always work with the doctor, and you know that's bottom line. We know that.
This is the answer, and that's just what you have to live with. And it was kind of left. So there was no plan. There was no nourishing, educational, nothing, right? It was just kind of, there's your answer and you're put over there and that's where you're staying. So to hear, you know, you're right. We don't have the answers on how the world needs to hear this, but there's definitely the little piece that we can take away and understand that there's always, when there's a yes, there's a no. When there's an up, there's a down, right? The law of polarity.
I love what you're doing, Crystal. You were giving the first part of my talk is understanding and helping the struggling learner, where we talk about the brain, and we have the list of the left brainers and the list of the right brainers. So think about this. They say left brainer is black and white, my way or the highway. Absolutely. Right brainer is all about options. Oh, well, maybe. You know, all rules are suggestions to us. The time at church is within 5 minutes, one way or another. I mean, really seriously, what's another song, right? Oh no, we've got to be on time for church. So in other words, most of the medical profession, and we're grateful for that, are very linear, very detailed, very scheduled. And so there's nothing wrong with that. We buy as much of that as it's going to be helpful for us. Meanwhile, for you and for me, it's so easy to say, okay, I'm Googling, I'm going to the library, I'm going to the bookstore, I'm going to see what other people have found, what over in Africa did they find that helped. We have a much broader view of the world. So all we're trying to do is bring a little bit of that broader in here without, of course, we can't all live in the ocean of Hawaii. So we do need that left brain piece. Absolutely. So yeah, but I recognize a fellow right brainer and I appreciate that. Options, right?
Options, we love options. So how can parents incorporate, you know, some of these practices into their day when they're working with their children or caregivers?
Right. Yeah, so we were just going to talk a little bit about, because you have early childhood. So let me talk about the early childhood things that we can do just when they're little. Sometimes, and every now and then, a child will decide that they want to walk before they crawl. And there's no way, once they've seen Paris, they will not go back down on the farm and crawl. So then what do? Every time you change your diaper, you just do cross. So you take the hand and the knee, you make a little song or whatever you want, but you pattern their brain. And the brain will say, okay, got it, we crawled. So in other words, it's not, oh, well, we missed that. So I want to do that. And we talked about the chewing gum, how when a child, the chewing is very, very soothing. It keeps the right brain happy so they can concentrate on maybe what your words are about what they just did wrong. So give them something to chew or to do, like you said, squeezy ball, that type of thing. But we talked about the vestibular system, the nervous system that we want to reconnect. And we know that the 3 parts, left, right, top, bottom, back, front. The back front goes from the receptive brain. So people who say they have a good receptive vocabulary, they can understand what you're saying, but they don't have a good expressive vocabulary. That's the front lobe. How do we reconnect back to front? Well, the brain integration therapy does it, but one of the ways you can do it just on your own is swinging. Big movements of swinging increases that back to front flow. So what we do with the body is making a change in our behavior and how body responds. Jumping on a trampoline is huge because that's the centering part of the brain, and that's the emotional, and that just keeps so many things going. So just even a little mini tramp around is so helpful. And then we were talking earlier about the left right. Came to mind was worked so well was that old sit and spin, where they just would, it was just marvelous. They would just move the little I don't even think there were gears. It was just a little circle, and then the other circle went around, and they would sit. And so if you'll watch kids, they will acclimate and go to what they need. You can just see what they're struggling with those, but that connects the left right. But there are many, many other ways to connect the left right. There are many different exercises. I've just focused on 6 of them that I could get done in the classroom in a 45-minute reading lesson 4 days a week. So I found if I did that, many of them would be taken out, especially I put in a consultative role. In other words, in a room where they were still doing grade level work, but someone was there to make sure they didn't sink. And then the next year they would move on. So that's what we see is the sit and spin for older kids. This is what I like to talk about is, and then we'll talk about where to get the brain integration. But you had talked about playfulness. And I've just been on the phone, as you can imagine with COVID, we just get phone calls all day and we're happy to talk to parents. We love it and whatever. So the whole time I'm talking about playfulness. And just a mom today, she said, he just can't, he was 11 and a half. We can't move on to subtraction. We'd like to move on to multiplication, but he just can't even get his adding facts. So the left brain would say repetition. Remember, the left brain's repetition, auditory, writing it down, say it again, memorizing it 100%. By the way, mastery is a whole term only left brainers use and really achieve. Right brainers, 80%. Hey, close is good enough. Move on to something else. You didn't get that 20% right. We don't care. Yes. So in other words, it's a different way. It's just a paradigm. So all I tell parents is, we can get them adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. Everything at the end of the year, if you're willing to change your paradigm. So the paradigm is we're going to show them, we're going to get playful. And remember all the old dots we used to use on our numbers? That's how, many of us learned. Well, we can take a time. If they can't remember 8 plus 5 is 13, they can see the dots on the 5, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. What does it take? A second more. So we'll have them do four rows and 4 across. We'll see by the end of this one session, they're going to do that. And they're going to do it fast. And we do the especially the dots have to have blood on them. And snot if we can. The 2 has a drippy nose. It's really icky. What are we doing? We're pulling up emotion. Emotion's the memory hook. See, when a child, if we're having to redo a program over and over, and we've already decided that we're not going to do mastery because that is not necessary. We need to move on. We need to teach them the biggest word that they think they can't spell. Like a little guy came and he couldn't spell. I showed him how to see words in their head just by adding picture. And that's how spelling bee winners win, by the way. Not everything is a rule. With those XYZ words, they have to have a picture. And we see them in the newspaper. What are they doing? They're looking up. And we know the physiological movement of the eyes up lights up the right brain so they can see it forwards and backwards. So when I teach these kids how to use their visual memory, we have auditory memory, visual memory. And so they say, unless they've had a brain tumor and had part of their brain removed, they have a visual and a auditory. So we're doing the visual memory, which is where our color, our picture, weird emotion. So they're looking up, and this was Jeremy, and he said he couldn't spell it. It was too hard. And he said, "What about Lamborghini?" Oh, well, he'd never be able to spell that. He said, "What about today?" So we took the Lamborghini, the H is the pipe coming out the back of and I can't remember all those letters. We also did psychology. So we did PSYCHOLOGY, YGOLOHCYSP. We can see it forwards and backwards.
Yeah, very, very fast.
Beautiful,
but you played that game and you can recognize that story in it. I love that.
We can still see all the colors. Yeah, warped for life. So you see, so the second grader went back into his room and he could spell. They said, "We want to be in that math class." We didn't ask them to shorten. What do we usually do when they have a spelling problems? They shorten the list. Well, that you're guaranteeing he's going to be poor in spelling all his life because everybody is learning the whole list, right? And I go in and I say, "I want the bonus words." and we put them all, we have to have ski accidents happen a lot. So, things have to blow up. We're not politically correct with our spelling words, but we laugh, we giggle, they see them forwards, backwards. We keep them always up on the wall, always in front of their camera. For parents, they say, well, do we have to go over them every day? I said, well, do they eat cereal? Put it in front of their cereal. Their camera has to work, you see. Let's not talk to only the tape recorder. That, for some kids with an auditory processing glitch, and many kids have them, I say, when you say, but I tell them, I say, I know, and your words are recorded in heaven. But just think about this. If it's coming out of your mouth, it's going out the left toe. So, and this is what, when we teach in services in school, we tell the teachers, you are getting probably 2/3 of your kids listening. Let's say social studies teacher, you teach well, good stories. But if you want to engage that last third, have a magic marker, if it's a whiteboard, in your hand. And anytime you say something, either write the word, or if it's a surprise, make a big circle with a wide mouth. Yeah, not only do they remember it, they're engaged. So using playfulness is what we do. We do what we call it, like I said, I'm writing an article called The Phonics Whisperer, where we take kids who, like she said, he doesn't know so he's 11 and a half, and he just called just before we came on here, and she said that we're still working on Magic E, and I just can't work on that another year. I said, yeah, let's put that on the shelf. So we always ask them if, they have room in their closet, and we're to put the curriculum for right now, just be brave and believe that for 6 months. So how did we learn this? First, I believed there was an answer. I knew God wouldn't create an earth without an answer to problems. So believe. Next, I observed. I became a Sherlock Holmes. So when they were reading, I didn't look at the words, I watched their eyes. So how many saccadic eye movements they were making. Oh, yeah, I know why they can't read. Their eyes are all over. No one had looked. Who would have thought? That's not in our, it's just, and be an observer. And so where we were an observer with him. And so I said, so for him, we're going to take shun, and you're going to write T-I-O and shun all the way down. And then we're going to make a picture like you're shunning and pushing him away. Now, if we know shun, let's just look, and then we put up men in front of it. Would you, mention, okay. And then we put ack. The C is always pregnant with a K, because, so we put a K in there. Action, okay. Then I wonder I put notion. I said, well, now you don't know. Now you have to use a rule. Rule is real hard. Either says his name or he's short. Okay, try notion. Notion, no, I don't know that word, notion. Oh yeah, I know that word. Pretty soon they're doing vacation. Then they're doing investigation. What are we doing? We're taking the units that would keep them, they were 2nd grade level phonics, we're putting it into 6th grade level phonics and 5th grade level by putting the units in a long word. So that's how we're playful. We take a long word, and the kids used to bring their paper with all crunched up in their pocket with a long word on it. Said, let's play with this one. Put it up on the overhead. I know this part. I know that part. See what you know and guess at the rest. But guessing that we know is educated guessing, but the short and long. So that's what we do that's how we do. We like playfulness. Playfulness is so important in teaching because it opens up the brain. So the parents, if they want to do a little 20-minute program with their guys, that let's say you have 3 kids and one of them is struggling, but the others aren't, I do it with them all because it doesn't hurt anybody and they're going to all do something anyway. So what we would just start out, I have a brain integration therapy manual that people can get from my website, but I am not the only midline person. Mine fits into the little schedule, and I have the ones that I like work the most, but there are many other good ones. So Brain Balance, as we know, offers a service, and it's a service that does midline therapy for you, and it's also very good. And then we have NACD, National Academy of Children with Disabilities. You can learn there. I think they do the crawling on the floor if you have a more involved child. We have little giant steps. There are other midline therapies that work. This is just the one I put together to fit in this crunch of time and with some academics in there. So the brain integration therapy is one. So how would they start their day? They just, the only thing that I did was left brain was put a tape on the floor. Because if you don't, the kids don't know where to stand for this, and they're all over the room. So for me, classroom management was never my easiest because I was one-on-one all the time. So we start with just doing cross crawls, just crossing the midline, reminding the brain we'd like to work together. A lot of kids want to be homolateral, and then you have to help them. They march and you do the hands. We have a video with the brain integration therapy that shows how a child at first school, if they're homolateral, they just march with their legs and you have to plant their hands and you play little games and laugh and silly. Some of these guys were 6'4". And I was doing this with them. But the one reason they would buy this for me is because we had them read and spell a long word forwards and backwards. After that, I could do anything because now they thought they were smart and not dumb. And that was the biggest key. The first day, all we did was the hardest thing that I could think of with the units all having some jazz going on. So it would be easy for them. So then sometimes we'll do an eye 8 exercise because we need those eyes to work together as a team or across the midline. It works wonderfully. Many of my kids were told they needed vision therapy, which is a very good thing. But in school, the school I taught in that 1 year, they couldn't afford it. So I did this. I said, well, I only know this tool. And so I just use the tool. By the end of the year, they weren't reversing. And they didn't make those saccadic eye movements, those extraneous eye movements. And so I just saw how this worked. And then we do a little ear 8 exercise. And then we sit down and we do that writing 8. And I always tell parents, if you have no time for anything else, do that writing 8 exercise because there's clearly something I don't know about that, because of all the reports I'm getting after 20 years of doing this. So that is just a way that they can put that in. I came up with this after I had my 6th graders come in with 2.2, like Casey, 2.2 reading level, spelling the word cuz CU was WUS, WUZ is what they did. And they said, well, what can I do that everybody hasn't done before me? Because they've had wonderful teachers, wonderful parents, good kids. And so I did the tool I had, the one that God had showed me. So I did the brain integration therapy. And he had an auditory processing problem also so badly that I asked him, Casey, I said, tell me your teachers after they'd been in school for 3 weeks. And he did like charades. For language arts, I have, that teacher who keeps her glasses, always over here with short gray hair. Oh, yeah, me, Mrs. Jones. Who do you have for woodworking? Oh, he has a crew cut, and his glasses are gray. Okay, that would see, the name is in the left brain, picture here. He couldn't put them together. So then the last part of the year, he said, ask me any of my teachers, Mrs. Kraft. Oh, okay. He did, because now he could see that in his head, and the name came over. So what's to lose? That's what I always say when people say, will brain integration help us? I said, it can't hurt. And we are finding that it even works with adults. But my whole emphasis has been children. So that's all collateral damage that I know about with adults.
What's beautiful, you're paving new pathways in the brain and reconnecting and kind of bulldozing. I see like my visuals, like kind of taking a bulldozer and getting rid of the big dirt piles that are blocking the ways, right? And as they're moving through these experiences, I just keep seeing paving new pathways, which is super beautiful. And to have these resources, understanding how the brain and the body connects. We talked about it before, but it's the approach to the whole child. Right. And teaching in a way where you might have a child that, one here and one here, and they're completely different. And one might learn more with the right side, one might learn more with the left side, and so forth.
Just see what brings the smile.
Yes.
You do something, if you get to the smile, you stop and do that one over and over again. Yeah. I love your term, by the way. I want to write that down. Paving new pathways.
Yes.
We could make a clinic like that. Paving, or at least an article, paving new pathways, and then you likened it to a bulldozer. I love working with right-brainers. Immediately put that into a picture, and do you see how that's a memory hook?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow.
Put it to work. See, you're talking about adults who could work too, and here we are. Just saved my own new pathway there through my
Mhm.
bulldozer. So thank you, Diane. That's really incredible information. I'm going to post below where our listeners can find you, and you've also included a PDF download. So we're going to get you to talk a little bit about that. It's the Identifying and Correcting Blocked Learning Gates checklist. So if you could just let our listeners know what that's all about.
That's our foundational. It's going to help a parent find out, is he just lazy? Is he, is they either diagnosed or not diagnosed? And we say, you know what? I just say, we don't care, let's just fix it. Bottom line, let's just take care of it. The connections will take care of it. So if a child, the checklist is this, and we know there are 4 learning gates. If what, oh, nice, huh? 4 learning gates. 4 learning gates. If all 4 of them are wide open, learning is a piece of cake. And like for homeschooling moms, it's like if their little one she just read, and they just read falling off a rock. I say, they slipped off the rock. Oh, I can read. I don't know. They don't. That's what they say. They don't know how they learn how to read. You read to them, they've got it. Multitude connections going on like crazy. If that was your first child and your second child struggled, well, then you were just set up because you thought you had done that with the first one. But no, it just happens with a lot of kids. Learning how to read and do educational things comes naturally if you have all connections. Various things can break down the connections. In utero antibiotics wants to be a hit. Multiple antibiotics in a row wants to take a hit. Having an injury, a flu, not crawling, we don't know. So I spent a lot of time studying the folders of my children. I would stay till 5 o'clock and study them. I thought maybe they all hadn't crawled. I had a real simplistic answer I was looking for. Well, maybe that was about 50% of them, but they all had allergies. So we found that histamine is a big blocker of the connections. Now, I can't change the histamine, but I can reconnect using the body. So the checklist said, if your child is over 7 years old and reading was for saw, on for no. Will it say later on, they'll say, well, they just outgrew that. No, they're just accommodating that. But see, they're having to think about that. So that's why they're behind in reading, because they can't, that hasn't been shoved over here. They have to think about left, right. I always say, like, let's say it's even dyslexia. It doesn't matter. Dyslexia is not permanent, any more permanent than anything else. It's like a virus. We can get rid of it. But they have to problem solve an L. Is it this? Is it this? Is it this? Is it this? They're problem solving all the time. So if you ever hear one being read out loud backwards, big time energy going to that. That's a hooray. Oh, when I would get together with Anna Alvarado, the gal who taught across the hall, I would say, I'm so thrilled I got this child. He's so far behind it from the school. I was hoping I could help him. He did was for saw. She said, yes, because we could get that visual system reconnected with exercises. We had seen it work every year and makes nothing else. If we can't take off any other load, we took off that load and he's going to make this much change. So when they track, or do they start reading and it's good and then it gets labored? That's probably a visual processing problem. And then we tell the parents what to do to correct it. A writing is the number one. A dysgraphia is the number one disability or glitch that we overlook, especially with our gifted kids. Are gifted with a glitch. I have an article like that on my website, which means these guys are 135 IQ, but we need a script for them because it got it all in their head. But when they put something in their hand, it disappears. It could be, like we talked earlier, a perfectionism. And that's a whole different, that may be, because if they write a reversal, that's golden for us. So later on, parents say, oh, no, we circled all the reversals. I said, oh, no, we're just thankful for every reversal they write down, because otherwise we have to do an MRI and see what's going on in their head. They say, no, I'm not quite there yet. Oh, good. So, so that helps. A reversal is a marked flag. We don't always get that. But what we get is that they'll write girl for grill. And if you ask them, oh yeah, it's GIRL, it switches. Remember, it doesn't, they don't have that strong plumb line. So things float around. They hate to write. They'll do the hardest math problem in their head rather than put what we call our offending utensil in their hand. Whether it's a pencil or typing, they have a block. It's a blocked learning gate that we can unblock, and it's just a fabulous exercise Dr. Getman came up with many years ago. An auditory processing problem, there are 10 different channels. They don't have all 10 most of the time, but if they do, we do a brain integration therapy and a looking upper left for every channel that's there. And that's how Casey, who couldn't remember his channel that was out, was sequencing his classes and bringing the name over. That's why sight words are hard for him too. So we made the connections. Now he could name everything because that was a channel that was out. So in that book, we just have 10 different things a child does that shows you which channel it may be out, and then which 10, it's really 20 minutes a day, 4 days a week of the exercises. So that's what we do. But as I say, other people do midline things too. But I love healing teaching. You talk about healing teaching, which is teaching a child to use that wonderful right brain as a memory hook for the facts. We get the data and facts. We put something funny, crazy, silly to remember it. When we put that together, you can see where the test scores would get so much better. Just it would be inevitable. So I love healing teaching, but I told the parent today, she said, do I need the brain integrations therapy manual? It said, well, that or something like it, because that's foundational to healing. Everything else I'm going to be compensating. Granted, they use that in college. My kids say, I use my anatomy, physiology words for spelling. We have goo and glob and brown stuff all the time on there. But he said, but I haven't healed anything. You see, I've shown them how to use it. I need that midline stuff. If I had nothing else and no other tool, it would be the tool that you've already discovered, which is the brain and the body work as a unit.
Such beautiful shares. I really, really, really am so appreciative that we've had this conversation, and you've given me so much light and awareness in my own children that we've talked about prior to our call today. And I want to offer for our listeners, you've put together the pre-primer sight words cards. We're doing a draw. So all of our listeners that have, followed us through this conversation, the code word is craft, and there will be an email below as to where you can send that code word of craft to be entered into the draw. And so much gratitude for providing that beautiful resource for our listeners today. And if there's one thing that you can leave with our listeners today, one little nugget, because you've given us so many already, but to sum it all up before we end the call, what would that look like?
Well, you're very brave to ask that. But it would be, number one, is the character of chemistry. If they are crying and throwing a fit, let's find out what's going on. Kids want to learn. They want to please you. They want you to be happy. And we just have to find out. And Jeremiah 30:33, God picks up his phone. He says, call on me and I'll answer. Your teenager wouldn't answer, but God will. So, you've got a resource. And then anybody can email us. craft@ecentral.com is where they email us, and we'll give you our phone number. So we can just sometimes set them in the right direction. And then the second thing, which you said, there are always options. We're never painted into a corner. There's always options, and they're available. And just believe in your child. Believe. Yep. And last thing would probably be play playful. There's nothing too zany that you won't, that for these kids, I can tell you, when you say, what should we do with that letter? We can't remember it. Oh my goodness. The ideas you're going to get. And then they buy in. So playfulness.
Beautiful. Well,
I enjoyed this a lot.
I really enjoyed it too. And for our listeners, thanks for watching and have a good day.